It was a cornerstone of the civil rights movement, but now in a split decision by the Supreme Court, a key portion of the Voting Rights Act has been struck down. Let's bring in our panel. Journalist Jonathan Alter, author of The Center Holds, Obama and His Enemies. CNN political contributor and former deputy campaign manager for the Obama 2012 campaign, Stephanie Cutter. And CNN contributor and columnist for the New York Times, Ross Douthat. John, I'm going to start with you. First of all, congratulations on your book. I have a copy right here. Everybody out there is very jealous. What do you think the political ramifications of this ruling are on a place like Florida, a state like Florida?
Very harmful to the Democrats. In 2012, Florida passed and the governor signed what could only be described as a voter suppression law that was struck down by the courts. There's actually a deposition where the author of the bill says, somebody else says in the deposition that he explicitly said this is intended to hold down black turnout in Florida. And the bill was overturned by the courts as unconstitutional. Now, with this new ruling, when it comes up again, if they try to do other things to suppress the vote, they'll probably get away with it.
Ross, there are those who say, including the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, this is not 1965 anymore. Blacks voted in greater percentages than whites in 2012. We don't need this anymore. What do you think?
I think that's a good argument. I think it's an argument that actually would be better made in a legislature rather than the courts. I think the biggest problem with this decision from the point of view of American governance is probably the same as the problem I'll have with whatever the court decides on gay marriage tomorrow, namely that we basically have sort of a court that swings back and forth between conservative activism and liberal activism and likes to overrule Congress on both fronts more than it should. But on the substance, you know, I mean, I think that all of us on this panel would agree that the situation in the South is substantially different than it was 40 years ago, and that the provisions of the bill that were written with those 40 years in mind, it maybe wasn't the wisest thing not only to renew them in 2006, but to renew them for 25 years in the future.
Why were they renewed in 2006 by a bipartisan majority? Because people understood that some of these problems, and we saw this in 19 states that enacted voter suppression bills in 2011 and 2012. I tried to bring them all together in one place in the book so that people can get a full picture of what went on. It was a concerted effort to suppress the vote. This is still a problem in the United States.
But first of all, nothing that's happened with the Supreme Court ruling makes it impossible to file suit against those provisions. The question is whether states have the right to it's essentially an issue of pre-clearance, basically, whether there's an assumption that states in the Deep South can't be trusted to make the laws before you sue against them. And in those 19 states, I mean, your argument basically implies that the pre-clearance requirement should be extended to all 50 states, right? I mean,
well, is that? I want to bring in Stephanie for one sec, which is just as the deputy campaign manager for you actually helped run a campaign in 2012. If this decision had been made, let's say, in 2010, do you think that could have changed the election?
I don't know if it would have changed the election because, you know, as Jonathan has written, we put a lot of effort into monitoring what was happening at the polls and to ensuring everybody had access to vote. And that included knocking down some of these restricted voter ID laws, knocking down some of the things that states were doing to make it more difficult for people to vote, or educating people on what the new requirements are. But, you know, just to hit on a couple of points that were made in this conversation earlier, you know, I don't think anybody is saying that the challenge of ensuring access to vote for everybody is over. And whether it just exists in the South, I don't think it just exists in the South.
Not all the states and counties were in the South.
Well, there are 30 states just this year have introduced legislation to restrict the ability for people to vote. So this is an ongoing problem. Okay, I agree that the Supreme Court should not have overstepped and done Congress's job for them, but they shouldn't have thrown it out. There's a lot of work to do, and they shouldn't make our jobs that much harder.
Right. But the argument that's being made here then, right, is that it's basically an argument against voter ID laws, which is a perfectly reasonable argument to make, but it's arguing that legislation designed to deal with the problem of the Jim Crow South, a specific, horrific problem, is well suited to deal with debates over voter ID laws in, say, Indiana in 2012 or 2013, right? I mean, that's the implication that you're saying, right? That a voter ID law should be dealt with through the same mechanisms that were designed to crush Jim Crow.
They could add to those mechanisms. And by the way, Jim Crow was brought up.
All of the anti-Jim Crow mechanisms, and we add new ones.
Because we're in this new phase where these bills are being introduced, actually originally in 43 states, to make it harder specifically for Democratic constituency groups to vote.
Right, but so you're arguing that voter ID laws require more federal activism.
It's not just about voter ID laws. It's not just about voter ID laws.
We're going to have to continue that in the green room, back where you were.
Take it off stage.
Ross, John, Stephanie, thanks so much for joining us.